So many people feel like they're more important than the calendar that they work with. So when your ego is bigger than the calendar, especially the calendar that you work with, if you work with other individuals, right, then it's just gonna show how much time you like to waste instead. So, I like to have best fate, best interest. I understand that dates change all the time. But then once you intentionally try to change somebody else's dates with the work that they're doing just by your calendar, that's then when a lot of individuals can see through the person who's not working in the favor of the calendar, which is like every day and themselves, and as well as especially if the other person uses the calendar in your advantage. So if somebody uses the calendar in your advantage and then you randomly now have an ego that doesn't tend to usually benefit the calendar or the person who then doesn't use the calendar correctly. So then if I just have to say we shouldn't waste time instead of we should speed things up, then you're using the calendar against my own ego instead of that's not even my ego, that's your ego using the calendar against your time. If I just say, let's be more efficient, you already know that because you're just using it to waste time instead. Every day is on the calendar already. If I work with you and you give me the dates, you're using the calendar and your ego in the wrong way, which means you would rather waste time instead of provide value to the person who or would already be in your best interest. So if somebody's using the calendar in your good fate or by your best interest, that just doesn't mean that he's wasting time. So then if he said be more efficient or just says nothing and you waste your time in the calendar, then he already knows for some odd reason you're operating against what is actually in real life, right? So then he gotta start thinking like maybe you found an Aztec or a Mayan calendar. Maybe you went that far back and now you're, I don't know, ancient history retrying to figure things out. He's not saying that the Mayan calendar or Aztec calendar is wrong or bad, but at a certain point, people still use it. But then once you have your ego say that now everybody's on the Aztec Mayan um, solar system calendar that's different than what we use efficiently. So you could also use your own time and calendar, but then once you use it against yourself, then it's not in, productivity for the other person who you would have wanted to use the calendar with. So anytime you have collaboration, if you use the calendar and the dates and times correctly, it's usually in favor of the person you're collaborating with. So if somebody allows you to have your entire own schedule and everything, that's not somebody else's ego. They're letting you do whatever. But then once you go against the calendar and yourself, now you brought your ego onto the person who, hey, whatever date is best for you, you let me know. So then when medical doctors call you and say, okay, I'm gonna get to this immediately, should take 5 days, maybe 10 days. Once they tell you should take 5 to 10 days, and usually it's faster, that's when they're using the calendar against themselves with their own ego. Also, then knowing that if you can create the calendar in your own time, you probably have more money than the person who is letting you create the calendar, or just not having an ego. So if they say, okay, that sounds good, that's you calling somebody and talking to somebody else, giving them the date, time, and then once you go against that, that's you just wasting your own date and time. Although the person then gotta be like, oh, okay, I thought you were the professional who had the date, time, and the calendar, even if that's a medical doctor, right? So then if there's a medical doctor, MD, that has date, time, calendar, and a lot of clientele, once they use that against themselves and then put in different variables, you just wasting time, especially then if you find out that person might have zero money or not an ego. So if you have more money than the person you give the date and time to, because of being professional and then having more money to maintain professionalism, where you go against a person that doesn't have the time, money, and you're more professional by getting the time and money, and you use the calendar against yourself when you can be making more time and money because the person just said okay to your dates, right? That means if you schedule something because you had the time, money, calendar, and we're in that profession, once you act non-professional against the person who just says, okay, I'm gonna, you know, I'm just going along with the calendar date you said, that's them not what? That's the person not putting the time and date on the other person. So that's a person accepting their request, but not having the ego to then manipulate the time and date. So then once you have a schedule or are more professional than a person, but you use the time and date against one person, so if you then view the person, right, look things up, look up music, look up this or that, if it's a doctor, even a nurse, even somebody that just has more time and money and has the calendar efficiency, you, that person is supposed to be moving in best interest of their client. So there's many people that have more money, right, that then use a calendar and a time. But then once you have more money and more time and use a calendar, but hold it against somebody else who doesn't say what you have to do, if they give you freedom and you act like they're doing something to you, now you're wasting a lot of time, money on your calendar. Plenty times throughout history, people have different names for it, you know, but that's just wasting time and money. So that if your ego allows you to waste more time and money during the dates you schedule, it's better off to just give the person who's your client money. Because then even if they lose whatever money that you scheduled with time and had more resources to do, they saved you more money by not having an ego. So then once you just give it all away by understanding that concept, you would actually save money and time by not having an ego. So the ego alone allowed you to waste dates, allowed you to raise resources, allowed you to have more money and become and say you're a professional. But then once you do this to somebody who's not acting like a professional to you, so they might still be a professional or not, but they just didn't have more time, more money, more resources. They probably weren't a doctor or a nurse. They probably weren't somebody who had the resources that could have actually helped. instead of wasting time, money, which then was or would be a ego versus you and the person you gave the dates to. So then if you tell somebody like, okay, in 3 weeks to a month, right, that's when your appointment will be. If you have more money, more resources, and more professionalism just by credentials or by lettering next to your name, right? Doctor, lawyer, sir, prince, queen, princess. If you have certain titles and you then waste your money to go against an individual who's just minding his own business, I accept the dates that you offer and you give instead of shifting the whole calendar around to suit the other person. That just means that they didn't have an ego. Usually, then sometimes people act like that's the other person making them follow their time, their date, acting like then if I have different money that lands on that time and date, they use that ego against their clientele instead. Or they have lack of understanding. So then the lack of understanding or the clientele, you then try to act like that one person has some kind of superpower or benefit that goes against the time, calendar, money, or whatever professionalism. This then will show you betting against yourself and somebody else. This is not smart to do, especially if you then find out that the person wasn't using their calendar. They just accepted your dates. So then if you tell somebody you have an appointment in 1 month, then they're accepting your 1 month offer instead of not. So then they're not changing it to 3 months. They're not changing it to a year. They just said, I accept that you will call me back in 10 days because you called me today. So it might take 5 to 10 days. Okay, that's 2 weeks without 4 days. So then if it passed 15 days and now you're operating without counting weekends and you pass 2 regular weekdays, now you're saying that you're not counting 4-day regular days to even work, or regular 5 days, 5 days a week, and now you're going against your own time, money, and calendar. Sometimes medical professionals do this. Sometimes younger individuals who you say, you pick the time and date. That's all you. You pick the time and date. Let me know. I'm open to doing business when it suits or fits you best. Sometimes then they act like that's an ego because they say, okay, I'm going with what you say. Sometimes that makes the other person more professional if they just say, okay, I'm going with your calendar, your schedule. If you follow through to that one person, you might find out that now you're taking away your own ego, or you're just following professionalism and not going against the other person. So many times, right, many individuals who are professionals, they like to help people, but they like to make money first, and they like to try to act more professional than their calendar. So you can help people, you can even want to make money first, but then the wrong variable is you kind of act more professional than the calendar you offer to the person that you want to help or make money to. Especially if this person is transparent enough to know that they're either a patient or they're on zero financially, which means they know that they have less money than you. Even if they're smart or their work ethic is unbelievable, if they're ever transparent to say that, right? And then you tell the person who is your client that, okay, if you don't reschedule it or then say an apology or then just give them the amount of money wasted, you have a bigger ego not only towards yourself, but also to the person who would pay you. So then if somebody give you $183 plus 77 plus, say then that's one person, right, that had me as a client that I paid. Say then the other person, I said, okay, so is it 3 weeks or then is it gonna be a month or 2 months? If they say I'm gonna mark my calendar, it's gonna be a month, and that's another person, and you say, okay, that sounds good. Once they don't follow to a month, that means what? If they waste 3 years, they've had an ego that's older than 3 years against somebody else. That means that then you should learn professionalism better. That just because you don't go to that one client, right? That's your ego doing that for no odd reason. And that was your calendar and they accepted your offer, right? So many times people give you an open calendar and they pay the person. That's more professional, right? Say, pick your own date. I'm gonna pay you too. Just show me what date it is, and I'll show up with open arms. Once you go against that and you have more money, you were the one who set the date. You, then that means you're bringing an ego to somebody else. That's probably not the best thing to do, but then we know, the type of time the person might be on, or we know that they were busy with certain other individuals that then act like they have more money, more time, or something better to offer. This then just goes against one other person. You can have multiple clients, even ones that have more resources or less. But then sometimes once you do that against the wrong client, so it's not the wrong one, but maybe they're transparent in a different way, right? By just accepting your date, your offer, your time, and not really budging with it. If you don't then follow through, they just know that either something went down, either you have more clients, or your professionalism overnight means that you just didn't listen to yourself. So then the amount of dates that you waste, sometimes it's a better concept to give all of that to that person. Because if you had that much ego where you could wait that amount of dates, right? Say you wait more, say you worked on this date and that date, and they are like, okay, that's not a problem. You say 2 weeks, it's not a problem. Maybe it's even 3. But then now, that's when your own, the person who's the client who has clientele, right? Or the employer who has employees that can control the scheduling. Many times we see this, right? They then put the scheduling in favor of themselves versus in favor of the person who works for them. So it's like you can have scheduling as much as you want. You the only person. But then if I gotta work for you too, and then the schedule don't help me, and I'm working for you, how is this mathematical equation about to function? So now you want me to work for you, and you don't want me to have a better schedule. But I'm the one that then assists you to make more money. So many times that's a very interesting concept. And then the amount of ego that then gets into somebody else's way, right? So you could have workload management. So you might have too much work, too much paperwork, and you might want more money. But then once this then interferes with the rest of your clients, it's not an ego if they just say like, okay, I'm just waiting for the day that you call. But then they know that if you take longer than that and it's just due to work, you might as well, the person can then see that you were that busy. Maybe sometimes if you have too much workload and you're that busy, maybe you wanted that much money, you wanted that much clients, or you wanted to learn how to manage before you learned how to manage enough, still not a problem. But then once that turns into non-professionalism against somebody who's a patient or a client that needs to have professionalism by certain dates, that's then when the other person can see the ego, right? Sometimes in order to watch this, then you give them free client services, or you give them trust that's different than anybody else, which means if you give them money too to spend, they can see that, okay, no matter if it was that many days and somebody had to wait and that cut into the other person's cost, they gave you the calendar, you made more money, and they just see that you would have been better off supporting that client. That's a big ticket client though. They don't have to describe that because big ticket clients can be on zero, or some people can be important but still not I don't know, not say how important they are. But then once the other person acts more important with their calendar and schedule than the person that's not acting very important, even if that person is, they could kind of see like, okay, so imagine you had a different patient or more, then apply that to them. So then if you had 100 patients and you can let one go, now imagine that if that was you. Or then imagine what that would do if that one person had more than 100 clients, or that one person then takes care of the 99, but then almost acts as if the other person doesn't have any effect by the 99. That's absolutely untrue. Because then the schedule is then shifted for all the 99. Just act like that one person isn't there and that's how you operate. So then, it's very interesting to see how the calendar moves in other people's hands or favor, especially when you allow them to adjust scheduling themselves. So many times in the workforce, or if you then have new employment, sometimes the employee isn't in benefit of the person who's then either paying them or on the schedule. So then if your schedule allows you to take that much time, sometimes that means you have that much ego compared to regular days. So there's a regular 30-day calendar, many things happen. But then sometimes it shows that one person who wants more clients, more money, and wants to be the handle management of the calendar. That's good to do. There's nothing wrong against the person, right? But then once you gotta have 99 clients and then it affects one differently, or it affects the days of the week and then the other individual's ego, sometimes that doesn't help them or the 99 people or just that one person that was working with them, because they're acting like scheduling systems and other things are then brand new, especially if they go to one person then that somebody might know. So then if you're learning your clientele and you're scheduling from sometimes maybe another manager, sometimes you learn not to operate in the best interest, because then you act like your free time is more important than allowing somebody else to benefit. So once you act like your free time is more important than somebody you could help, that's when you start messing up the calendar system. Doesn't matter if you're older or you're younger. You might have more time, more resources, or more money. Or you might have a professionalism that might be a nurse, a doctor, or something else where it allows you to have that responsibility. Sometimes when someone allows you to have that, that's very important. So someone else makes you a very important person, right? Sometimes they know this, sometimes they don't. if they then know that just by of chance, then you could be affecting some other very important person's scheduling just by you having more responsibility, more money, more management, or working with the wrong people acting like they know management differently. Sometimes once you continue to go to more people and act like the person who says this is not in favor, you continue to go down the list, and then you're showing not only that one person but everybody else in your contact list. Say that one person you don't help or then use on the time, even when they're not saying anything, knows maybe sometimes 50 countries, or knows, maybe he doesn't know but the 99 other clients know this person. You could still be learning. It could still be a handshake to continue to do business. But then we then learn that sometimes the ego is bigger than time, is bigger than money, is bigger than the calendar system, and bigger than your family's generations if you can waste one person's time, or if then they find out that your family knows the other person that you're wasting time with. Then you find out that even though the other person has transparency and knows everybody else and gives them the ball or their best interest or the scheduling of the calendar, once it goes against the employee who works more than the manager, it kind of doesn't make sense. Because if I'm already working more than you and then you're not in my best interest or favor, I'm already working more than you, so that means you're off. So if you're off already and you don't make the schedule in favor of the person who's not off and that's working, it kind of looks like your ego transcended past the calendar and even work ethic to make money. Then you just, you know, managing money with an ego, and it's not even efficiently or efficient with your customers or your clientele or the rest of the individuals. Maybe it's not even a customer or the employee or clientele. Maybe that's a new lead, or some might be friend, family, or your partner, or somebody you just shook hands with. Then it shows that your ego is this big. Okay, your ego is more big than 1 month and 99 clients. And I was just one of them. Sometimes that doesn't make sense. You could still pick up the ball later, but then you know that somebody by default is already in your best interest by just, minding their own business. Very interesting topic.